Welcome back to Noir History. Tonight, we open a classified archive from the Cold War. Beneath the divided streets of Berlin, Western intelligence agencies constructed a secret tunnel designed to spy directly on the Soviet military machine. But hidden inside the operation was a terrifying possibility. The Soviet Union may have known about the tunnel from the very beginning. This is the dark history of the Berlin Tunnel, a chilling tale of espionage, deception, and betrayal. Berlin, early 1950s. The Second World War had ended only a few years earlier, but peace never truly arrived in Germany. Instead, the ruins of Berlin became the center of a new and invisible conflict. The Cold War. The city itself was divided into sectors controlled by the victorious powers. In the west stood the Americans, British, and French. In the east stood the Soviet Union. Every street corner carried tension. Every apartment building hid secrets. Every train station felt watched. At night, Berlin transformed into a city of shadows. Fog drifted through bombed-out streets while military patrols moved beneath flickering streetlights. Intelligence officers crossed checkpoints carrying false documents and hidden messages. Informants disappeared into crowded cafes while surveillance teams watched from parked vehicles. The war had changed. Bullets were replaced with information. And information had become the most dangerous weapon in the world. The Soviet Union controlled East Germany with extreme caution. Military communications flowed constantly between Moscow and Soviet commanders stationed across Europe. The West desperately wanted access to those conversations. But penetrating Soviet communications directly seemed almost impossible. Almost. Because beneath Berlin's divided streets, Western intelligence agencies were preparing one of the boldest espionage operations in modern history. Inside heavily secured intelligence headquarters, American CIA officers and British MI6 agents developed a dangerous proposal. They would build a tunnel beneath East Berlin. The mission was simple in theory but terrifying in execution. Western engineers would secretly dig underground from the American sector into Soviet-controlled territory. Once completed, intelligence specialists would tap into Soviet communication cables carrying military conversations across Eastern Europe. The codename for the operation was Operation Gold. The tunnel would stretch hundreds of meters beneath enemy territory without attracting Soviet attention. Construction had to remain completely hidden. If discovered too early, the operation could trigger an international crisis between nuclear superpowers. Only a small circle of intelligence officials knew the full scope of the mission. Workers were screened extensively. Documents were compartmentalized. Every movement was monitored. Even among Allied intelligence services, trust was limited. The Cold War created paranoia everywhere. Still, American and British intelligence leaders believed the risk was worth taking. If successful, the tunnel could provide direct access to Soviet military strategy, troop movements, and internal communications. It was an opportunity almost too valuable to ignore. Construction began in silence. Deep underground, engineers worked through the night beneath Berlin's scarred landscape. Trucks transported equipment disguised as ordinary military supplies. Guards secured entrances while excavation teams dug carefully through wet soil and unstable ground. The tunnel itself became an extraordinary engineering project. Ventilation systems prevented suffocation. Steel reinforcement beams stabilized collapsing walls. Sophisticated recording equipment was installed inside hidden listening chambers. Everything had to function perfectly. And everything had to remain invisible. The atmosphere underground was suffocating. Workers spent long hours surrounded by dust, heat, and fear. Every unusual sound raised anxiety. Every vibration from above suggested possible discovery. But despite the danger, the tunnel slowly advanced towards Soviet communication lines. Finally, after months of construction, Western intelligence officers succeeded in connecting to underground Soviet cables. The operation was active. Inside intelligence monitoring rooms, analysts began recording conversations from Soviet military headquarters. Thousands of hours of communication flooded into CIA and MI6 archives. For the West, it appeared to be one of the greatest espionage victories of the Cold War. But unknown to many inside the operation, another intelligence game had already begun. His name was George Blake. To British intelligence, Blake appeared loyal, intelligent, and highly respected inside MI6. He had access to sensitive operations and classified information involving NATO and Western espionage activities. But secretly, Blake worked for the Soviet Union. He had become one of the most important double agents of the Cold War. Historians later concluded that Blake informed Soviet intelligence about Operation Gold before the tunnel was even completed. That revelation changed everything. Because if the Soviets already knew about the tunnel, a disturbing question emerged. Why did they allow it to continue operating? The answer was chilling. Exposing the tunnel immediately would reveal the existence of a Soviet spy inside British intelligence. Protecting Blake was more valuable than destroying the tunnel. So Soviet intelligence made a calculated decision. They remained silent, which transformed the Berlin Tunnel into something far more dangerous than a secret listening operation. It became a carefully managed illusion. A psychological performance between rival intelligence agencies. While the CIA celebrated success underground, Soviet officials quietly observed the operation from a distance. The Cold War was no longer just about gathering intelligence. It became a war of deception itself. For nearly a year, the tunnel continued intercepting Soviet communications. Western analysts worked day and night translating recordings, reviewing military reports, and studying conversations captured from Soviet lines. Some intelligence appeared valuable. Troop deployments, supply movements, internal military discussions. Yet over time, certain analysts began noticing inconsistencies. Some intercepted conversations sounded strangely unimportant. Others felt almost too convenient. Was the Soviet Union feeding selected information into the lines intentionally? Or were the communications genuine? No one could be certain. Inside intelligence agencies, uncertainty created paranoia. Analysts questioned each other's conclusions. Supervisors feared hidden manipulation. Trust slowly disappeared inside the world of espionage. Because in the Cold War, information itself could become a weapon. And sometimes the most dangerous lie was the one designed to look believable. Then, in April 1956, the illusion ended. Soviet authorities suddenly announced the discovery of a Western spy tunnel beneath East Berlin. The news shocked the world. Journalists were escorted underground by Soviet officers who proudly displayed the exposed operation before cameras and international reporters. Photographs of the tunnel spread rapidly through newspapers across Europe and America. The Soviet Union publicly condemned the operation as evidence of Western aggression and espionage. For the CIA and MI6, the exposure was humiliating. Years of secret planning had collapsed into international scandal. But privately, intelligence officials feared something far worse. A mole. Someone inside Western intelligence had betrayed the operation from within. Internal investigations began immediately. Officers reviewed classified access records. Agents were questioned behind closed doors. Suspicion spread across intelligence departments in London and Washington. The atmosphere became toxic. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. For years, George Blake escaped suspicion. He continued operating inside British intelligence while secretly providing classified information to Moscow. The scale of the damage was enormous. Western operations were compromised. Networks of informants were exposed. Intelligence missions collapsed before they even began. Finally, in the early 1960s, Blake's betrayal was uncovered. The revelation stunned the intelligence world. One trusted officer had secretly undermined countless operations during the most dangerous years of the Cold War. Blake was arrested and sentenced to prison in Britain. But even then, the story did not end. In a dramatic twist worthy of a spy novel, Blake later escaped prison and fled to the Soviet Union, where he lived for decades under Soviet protection. To the West, he became a symbol of betrayal. To Moscow, he remained a Cold War hero. And the Berlin Tunnel became permanently linked to his legacy. Today, the Berlin Tunnel remains one of the most famous espionage operations in Cold War history. Not because it failed completely, and not because it succeeded completely, but because it revealed the terrifying complexity of intelligence warfare. The operation demonstrated how modern espionage depended not only on secrecy, but also on manipulation, psychological strategy, and controlled deception. Inside the tunnel beneath Berlin, both sides played dangerous games with information. The CIA believed it was secretly listening to the Soviet Union. The Soviets quietly allowed the operation to continue. Neither side fully trusted the other. And nobody truly understood how much of the information was real. That uncertainty became the defining atmosphere of the Cold War itself. A world where truth disappeared beneath layers of secrecy. A world where allies feared betrayal from within. A world where tunnels beneath ruined cities became battlefields in a silent war for information. And somewhere beneath the streets of Berlin, hidden beneath concrete and history, the shadows of that invisible war still remain.